Hello, everybody. I am Jessica, Situ's Partner Engagement Manager. Situ is a global accommodation agency, and we're so proud to launch the first Beyond Booking webinar series today. Just to let you know, we will be waiting for our last speaker, Alistair, to join. But without any further ado, I will now hand over to Richard from VR Consultants Ltd, which will be our brilliant host today. So, Richard, I'll hand over.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, thank you for calling me a brilliant host. I will correct one of the things on the email is I'm not an expert in legislation. The two incumbents here, Fiona and Alistair, when he arrives, are the go-to people in all things related to legislation in this industry, certainly in the UK anyway. So thank you for having me. This is a really super important topic and will affect everybody in the short-term rental industry. You've had an introduction. I have a small consulting company and I work with Situ on some topics, and I'm super happy to be involved in this Beyond Booking webinar series. So we're really aware that the audience is seeking clarity on lots of these issues, and I suspect there are people from all across the country here, which will be England, Scotland and Wales. And I'm going to hand off to Fiona initially, and then Alistair when he arrives, and give yourself an introduction, Fiona, but also explain the role of the association. Also roll back the rocks a bit in terms of what you actually do, because associations are often seen as something in the background, and they are becoming hyper important, I feel.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks Jessica and everyone at Situ for this opportunity. It's lovely to see everybody, and hi Alistair. The Association of Scotland Self-Caterers was established in 1978, so we've been around for an awfully long time. It feels like I've been there for that whole time, but I actually haven't. I've only been here for 10 years. We are the second oldest association representing this sector in the world, and we currently have around 1,700 members. So obviously, we support the sector in terms of guidance sheets and support and advice and marketing platform and all of those other good things. But a lot of the reason why people join now is for the reason that we're here today, which is around the advocacy and lobbying piece. So we become the voice of all of our members. We make sure that we are putting the ASSC at the front of all conversations when it comes to regulations, whether it's about specific regulations for our sector, for example, short-term let licensing and planning up in Scotland, or whether it's a wider conversation like visitor levies, which is taking up an awful lot of my time at the moment. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right, Richard. Associations are actually becoming more and more important because our sector is so diverse and so divergent and made up of multiple small operators that's really critical for organisations like the ASSC and PASC to represent those small voices as one united voice. And that's what Alistair and I do across the whole of the UK. I concentrate on Scotland, he concentrates, bless his heart, on England and Wales. So I suppose that's kind of a very fast whistle-stop tour. We also work with valued partners such as Situ and people that work behind the scenes to support our sector, thereby kind of creating this amazing community, vibrant community that represents the ecosystem that is short-term let licensing. Or self-catering. Can we call it self-catering?
Oh, you can call it vacation rentals, safe catering, short-term rentals, holiday homes, holiday letting, holiday lets.
All of
been
that.
Through all these, but that's a nice segue into Alistair, who's been around the block as well. Or did I break up there? Did I break up?
Does Jess, do you need to allow Alistair to come off mute or something, possibly?
Alistair, I do believe you have access to your mic.
Apparently not.
Apparently not. Can you hear us, Alistair? Okay, but you can't speak. No, in which case, while you're figuring that out, I'll jump back to Fiona, because one of the things I think we're all really interested in is the challenges you've faced in Scotland and how that's going to potentially affect the decision-making processes south of the border, because we're obviously looking for more holidaymakers south, and you've probably lost some going north.
Oh, we're pushing them down south. We're doing a super job up here, I tell you. The Scottish government, in their infinite wisdom, has been listening to a lot of people who have created since 2017 a very decent narrative around the fact that self-catering or short-term lets impact housing stock and create antisocial behaviour and leave litter in the streets, and I think it was pizza boxes specifically the other day that we were criticised for. We've also been blamed for being sex traffickers, drug dealers and puppy farmers in a public forum, which I constantly push back at them for, which the head of police has no evidence whatsoever, but that's what she was saying. Anyway, that aside, so they decided to introduce short-term licensing and associated planning regulations a long time ago. The conversation's been live since about 2017, 2018. They then introduced said regulations in 2022, and the result has been absolutely catastrophic. So our sector has paid £15 million to continue operating in the way that some of them have been doing for decades. So it's yet another kind of tax, essentially. It has not improved antisocial behaviour. It has not improved health and safety, and it has most definitely not solved the housing crisis. So as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing's been an absolutely unmitigated disaster. We've won 4 legal challenges against Edinburgh Council and Highland Council, and we continue to push back. The Scottish Government, on top of all of this, we're seeing people leaving the sector left, right and centre. We're now seeing more people leaving on the basis that the visitor levy is now coming in. And again, it has been pushed through legislatively very, very poorly. Terrible drafting. It's open for legal challenge, which I spotted and flagged to the Scottish Government yesterday. Yeah, it's just another disaster. You know, I do think it's really important. Regulations and legislation is meant to support sectors, not clobber them. And unfortunately, the policies that Scotland has developed has done the diametric opposite to that. So we will continue to work on behalf of the sector to support the people in it and to try and mitigate against some of the worst excesses of the regulations.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Kind of segues into Alistair here. So welcome, Alistair. I'm glad everything's working now. So jump back to the beginning, a bit of an introduction of yourself, why the association, particularly PASC and ASSC, are so important, and why everybody should pay attention because of the avalanche of legislation and potential legislation coming down the line.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Situ, for inviting us on. We are much more recent than the ASSC. We've only been going for 9 years, but it does, as Fiona said, feel a little bit longer. One of the main reasons that trade associations across the whole hospitality sector are growing is because of the level of interventions. You know, if the government left us alone completely and had done for the last decade, Fiona and I would have much more time on our hands, I'm sure. So it's partly driven by the interventions of government and businesses of all sizes, from very large agencies right down to somebody who has a yurt or a shepherd's hut, and every diverse option in the middle has got no idea how to keep up with all of this. There is so much stuff, it's almost, you used the word avalanche. I normally agree with you entirely, Richard, but I prefer the word tsunami. It describes it better. So, you know, it's a ridiculously complex mix coming down. And I think that that Fiona and I work together all the time. We have an MOU between the two associations to collaborate wherever we can, works really well. The biggest problem is that none of the governments, England, Scotland, Wales, ever look at everything in the round. Each economic impact assessment, if they ever do one, is only based on that silo. It's not based on the combination effects. And I say, if I have one New Year wish, it would be that each of the three governments did a combination economic impact assessment, because then we would see significant change. So that all sounds a bit negative, but you know what the associations are there for, and the way I was explaining this to an agency group yesterday was, we've got your backs so that you can keep up to date with all this, be informed, know the information is accurate and reliable without having to use Google. Google is wonderful, but has its flaws. Facebook is occasionally wonderful, but has deep flaws if you're searching for anything that's on taxation or regulatory. And we're very careful about what we publish so we can be relied upon. And I think that's another message to get across to people on the call, that you need to be very careful where you're getting tax and regulatory information from, because you're running your business based upon it. I still think
yes, another segue there, Alistair, because it'd be good to get into the detail of some of this now as well, just to know exactly what the regulations are across England, Scotland and Wales.
Okay.
So, you know, number of days stay and everything else related to that. And then, you know, it'd be quite good to move into the FHL challenge coming as well. But could you just explain the fundamentals of what needs to be covered if you are a short-term renter of any description? I don't know if you're going to pick this up for England and Wales and separately for Scotland, or they cross borders. But
I think
maybe
probably if we do Scotland first, ladies first, and then any that differ, because they do differ in England and Wales, we can. So if Fiona does Scotland specific, I'll do Wales specific, and then do a short summary in the ones coming in England.
Okay, Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair, ever the gentleman. So in Scotland, I suppose this makes sense because in Scotland it's done. So the short-term let licensing, any property that is rented out commercially overnight has to have a short-term let license unless it is a part of a landlord tenancy agreement. So you need to apply for your license. There are 32 different schemes across the 32 different local authorities. They cost anywhere between £205 and £5,962 for a license between 1 or 3 years. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I won't go into the detail, but you can of course get all of that detail in our extremely extensive FAQs that we developed for the government and for Visit Scotland, which can be found on the website, which is ASSC.co.uk. In addition to that, they've introduced planning control areas. Again, broadly speaking, there are only 2 at the moment, one in Edinburgh and one in Ward 20 of the Highlands, but other places such as Fife and Moray are mooting the point that they want to introduce a planning control area. Essentially, in a planning control area, you need to have get planning permission in order to operate as a short-term let, secondary let specifically, so a self-catering, an entire property. 3 of the legal challenges have been around the fact that they cannot apply that retrospectively, but they all tried to. So going forwards, if you're an existing operator, you do not need to get planning permission unless there's a material change of use, but new operators will have to get planning permission. The point is, I've just done a huge piece of work on number of empty homes and second homes in Scotland, and some of the data is quite shocking. So for example, in Argyll and Bute, there's something like 2,700 secondary lets, so self-catering units, and 12,500 empty and second homes. You do the maths. Are we creating the housing crisis? No, we're not. So that's planning control areas. Obviously, we've got the visitor levy coming in, which is a massive hit. You have to pay VAT on top of the visitor levy, and the money that comes in from the visitor levy is counted as turnover. So you'll be paying tax on the visitor levy. Great. And for many, it will push them into the VAT threshold. So that's hugely difficult to follow. In Scotland, we have got the small business bonus scheme. And in order to be eligible for the small business bonus scheme, you have to be available for 140 days and actually let for 70 days. Now that for us is fine. We supported that position. What we didn't support was what Wales did, which Alistair's going to come on to in a moment. And I will let Alistair talk about furnished holiday let taxation abolition, because that's a fun one. Over to you.
Okay, there are a couple that will have UK-wide impacts. FHL abolition is the first. That takes away various tax allowances for people who operate in the sector. It's very complicated. It does depend how your business is structured, but this was a specific structure created about 40 years ago for short-term self-catering holiday lets. So it's not a tax loophole. It was a regime designed by HMRC to work for that sector. So it's being abolished. We believe that it will be abolished. We've worked our what's its off to try and stop it being abolished or mitigate it. The only thing that's likely to happen now is that we may get a delay to align with other finance bill legislation. And this, I wanted to bring this one up first because this is the danger of bringing in any tax measures, and this will be repeated again when we come to the Wales Tourism Levy, when you don't have the data, and the data that would be provided by statutory registration. We did a freedom of information request to the Treasury on it, and they're basically their data on it, their economic impact assessment is that the number of people that will be affected by this is not very many. And well, I beg to differ, really. So if you don't have the data, it's very difficult to have good policy. And you're going to hear that as a repeating theme through all the work that Fiona and I do together. So FHL, we have got some expert advice in to help us table a formal amendment asking for a year's delay. We, on advice from people much more expert than myself, that is possibly the maximum that we would be able to get. We then move on to, we've got labour reforms coming and how housekeeping, casual labour may be employed. I'm not going to say any more than that, but we are watching what that will mean like a hawk, because it will have an impact on the people that deliver the actual service at ground level. Then there is EPCs for England and Wales. You already have them in Scotland. That's a whole consultation in England and Wales on the whole EPC system, and anybody doing commercial letting will be rolled into that. We were previously exempt. That closes on the 22nd of February, the consultation, so we're all over that, and we'll be asking our members and readers for information on that. And last of all, there is, and by no means least of all, renters reform. A large number of our members do long-term lets in the sense of what we've always called in our centre winter lets. In the winter you let the property for 2-3 months at a reduced rate or whatever. It's been a common practice for 40 years. That may become impossible under renters reform, or so difficult as to be not worthwhile. We do not have the detail. We keep trying to, we've requested again another meeting with, it's now called Ministry of Housing, not Department of Levelling Up. We requested again yesterday another meeting to get a full update on the direction of travel of this. Essentially what really wrecks it is the desire to have a hard and fast Section 21, which means that you can't evict anybody pretty much for any reason at all, and therefore even if you let somebody in for 60 days, if they don't choose to pay at the end of it, how do you get them out when you want to bring your summer guests in? Very complex, and we have a work thread on that. Then we come down to what might be a positive, which is statutory registration. In England, I'll do England first, because England could actually be a case study of how to do it if DCMS get it right, which is just the safe and legal aspect. Have you got a fire risk assessment? You've got a gas certificate. Do you own the property? Where is it? How does it sleep? Register, and off you go. That would give the data. That would be sufficient. That would also give the consumers confidence, and would create a level playing field. That's all it needs to be, and currently that's what it is in England. In England, the number of days that you have to let to be on business rates, and in most cases benefit from small business rates relief, is 70 days let, 140 days available. We now skip to Wales. In Wales, the threshold got raised 3 years ago to 182 days let and 252 days available. This is way too high. I mean, if you've got a lovely £2 million property on Abersock Beach and you price it right, you probably do 365 days. If you've got a bothy in the Brecon Beacons, you haven't got a chance. If you're really good at marketing, you might be able to get 182 days. But if you're just a small diversified farm, you probably haven't been on every social media course. It's a one-size-fits-all calamity. It's causing massive mental health problems. It's causing all kinds of issues, especially as Wales is down 23% 2024 on 2023. How do you hit an artificial target if the market is reducing by a quarter? So we have got a major campaign to try and get that reduced. I'll take any questions on that. In Wales, they have talked about statutory registration, but they're aiming towards licensing, so nearer to Fiona's, somewhere in the middle, which is why we're desperate to get England done to show the benefits. But what they're also doing in Wales is they brought the statutory registration in at pace, because they can't bring the levy that they're proposing to bring in unless they have all the registered businesses to tax. So they're not doing any of the bit that we want, they're just doing the bit so that they can tax the owners. Now, a really interesting statistic on their own data is that they assessed how much this would impact the Welsh economy, and they said that there were somewhere between 6 and 15,000 businesses, sorry, 16,000 and 55,000 businesses that would have to charge it. Now, how do you do, as business people out there, an economic impact assessment if you don't know how many customers you might target in a campaign? Well, says the marketing director, between 15 and 55,000. The MD might say, could you be a bit more precise on that? A bit more focused, bit more. So it's, again, like Fiona said, very flawed, and we're pushing back on that. We have oral evidence at the end of this month. I think there may well be some changes on the levy. The difference about a levy, rather than something that appears to hit second homeowners or property owners, is that a levy hits the public's pocket. And in Wales, charging children, Welsh children, to go on holiday is going down like a sack of spuds. Okay, so sometimes we have to use strange allies and strange angles to win arguments. I think that's the fastest I can do. There are 17 altogether. If you've got time, you haven't, but if you follow if you follow the ASSC, you will be kept up to date on all of these.
Well, thank you, Alistair. That was almost the portent of doom.
Can I jump in there? Can I jump in there? Just to follow up with what Alistair was saying, I think the argument in Scotland, certainly, and it will be the same in Wales and anywhere else that you bring it in, is, well, we pay a tourist tax when we go to Italy or Spain or whatever. Yes, but the fact is, in Italy and Spain, A, they do not charge their nationals, and B, they have a very simple, small, fixed fee, and they don't have 20% VAT. So for anybody to compare like for like is just completely pointless. But when I go out into the street and I say, do you realise that you're going to be paying it when you go on your next break to the Highlands or the Argyll and Bute, or you're going on business to Edinburgh, or you're going to visit somebody that's in hospital in Inverness, you'll be paying the visitor levy. That's gone down like the said sack of spuds. It's exactly the same thing. People just don't realise it applies to them. It's a tax on the British people.
So a couple of questions for both of you, actually. One is, you have an incredible amount of knowledge about what's going on, and I know personally that you deal at very high levels as well, and I think it's probably quite good for the audience to know what level you're dealing with. This isn't website information. This is dealing with very high level government individuals. It'd be quite interesting to hear who you've spoken to and how you're constantly lobbying against these things. But also, I'm pretty sure in the audience here, there's people with traditional short-term rental cottages, but there's also service departments and DMOs and everybody else in here as well. And they're all beginning to face the same challenges that you both just raised. So are there, to your knowledge, any differences between those? Are all these regulations going to apply to service departments, for example, the same as short-term rentals? And another question, if I was about to start a short-term rental right now, and I know you both have your own businesses as well, what would the list of things I would need to do to cover to make sure that I am compliant? Because I think the word compliance is super important here, and particularly for the likes of Situ clients, because some of their businesses are blue chip companies who need to ensure that the supply of inventory is, is really compliant. So imagine I have a property today, and I'll start in England. What would I have to do, Alistair? Fire safety, all this sort of stuff.
But the popular misconception is that a lot of what we talk about when we talk about statutory registration in England is new regulation. It's not. It's about the application of existing legislation to create a level playing field. So, for example, my business here has a full fire risk assessment for each of the 4 different properties. We have gas certificates for each of them because they all have gas. We have a ring main certificate that's never more than 5 years old. We have a PAT testing that's never more than 2 years old. We have a private water supply, so we have to have water testing certificates done. And I'm really beginning to run out at that point. It's not. People talk about millions of things. Yeah, there are things you've got to do if you do things. If you have play equipment, you should really have a ROSPA certificate. But 95% of us don't have play equipment. You see what I mean? We have a swimming pool, so we have to check the swimming pool. If you have a hot tub, you have to check it. These are reasonably obvious things which are in law unrelated to you necessarily being a short-term let. You have to do them because it's a commercial property. And this is the failing that so many make, and is confused by the sort of notion of I'm not a business, I'm an Airbnb, if I dare say that. I don't need to do this stuff. Well, you do. That's the law. In England and Wales, if you let a room for a single night for money, all of those rules apply. That's the law. It's got nothing to do with me. I didn't. That's and with fire rules, you're not going to change that or lobby against it. Okay, it's just not going to happen. It's safety. So that's where the kind of notion of just list your property while you go away for the weekend causes the chaos and the bad narrative that it does, because then people see all these pink dots on maps and think the whole of Newquay is an Airbnb. It would be much better if only legitimate. So that's all you have to do. It's not that scary. So I'd want to say, we do it here and love it, and it's a great business. It's a really, really good business. It's not difficult to do a fire risk assessment unless your property is unsuitable.
Yeah, Fiona, do you want to feed back on that in terms of your experiences in Scotland and how it's affected the inventory supply and then the irrational noise that you've encountered?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Alistair. None of the health and safety regulations are any different to what existed 5 years ago and what I've been complying with for 22 years for my own business.
Yeah.
And as Alistair says, they're not scary. They're basic common sense. You just have to get on with it. And it's not okay for occasional hosts to think that they can get away with allowing people to stay in unsafe accommodation. That's not good enough. So we are entirely supportive of the health and safety element, but we don't support having to go through huge amounts of hoops. And don't forget, statutory registration is a notification scheme. Licensing is an authorization scheme. So in England, you are saying, this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm complying with health and safety regulations and all other compliance needs. In Scotland, having operated for 22 years, I had to go, please, can I carry on doing this? You have to ask for permission. Now, so that's where we're at. Just in terms of going back to serviced accommodation that's pertinent on this call, is that in Scotland, the serviced accommodation sector lobbied very hard and got themselves exempt from short-term let licensing. But having said that, you can't just call yourself a serviced accommodation, which a lot of people do. Just because you've got a nice little pad in a city, it's not necessarily serviced accommodation. There are 2 legislative definitions for serviced accommodations in Scotland. So one, there have to be more than 5 in one unit. They have to share a front door and share additional serviced provisions. So essentially you're in a part hotel. You can't just be a serviced accommodation because you fancy it. It's the same as you can't just be a bothy. you know how some people might call their property a bothy because it sounds all romantic and cute and Scottish. Well, a bothy is actually something that is at least 100 meters from the road, has no electricity, water supply, etc., etc. So there are definitions. You can't just name yourself a hotel because you want to be a hotel. If you're a short-term let, you're a short-term let, and people, I think, find that kind of difficult to navigate. Going back to your first question, who do we lobby with? Alistair and I are the same. We constantly speak to ministers. So I deal with the Minister for Public Finance, who's doing the visitor levy, the housing minister, who's doing short-term let licensing, the tourism minister, who obviously does tourism, funnily enough. And I believe that I'm in the tourism industry, not the housing industry, but that's another matter. Obviously, MSPs, I've got a meeting with the Scottish Tourism Alliance Policy Group with the Under Secretary of State for Scotland tomorrow. I've got 2 MSPs tomorrow. You know, Alistair's the same. We spend a lot of time in parliaments and various halls of important policymakers. And of course, press for us is critical. So last year, we had over 200 press mentions across either newspapers or TV or radio. So it's really important that we amplify our messaging by the press and social media, because actually policymakers and politicians notice that ridiculously.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I mean, Alistair, before you jump in, we've got like 6 minutes left, and I've got a whole raft of questions. So a brief on the people you speak to, but I'm actually really interested, I think other people are, in terms of application of these rules. Are they done at a government level, like licensing or registration and taxes, or will it be done at a local council level, and will we see disconnect everywhere?
Okay, well, we try and lobby for it to be things to be national, simple and standard, so that it's a level playing field. The trouble is, you've seen in Scotland where different councils attribute the rules and the application forms differently. In Wales, you're seeing it applied differently by county, and you've got devolution coming in England. So I fear we're going to see the mess. Now, that is a real problem for us as associations, because it's much easier, if I'm completely honest with you, to lobby centrally than it is to have to turn up to Cumbria Council one day, Kent the next, and Norfolk the day after. You can see the challenge that presents. And that's why governments like to devolve power, because they can say, oh, we were elected to devolve power and the councils can do what they like. So that's a real challenge for us. Who do we engage with? Our primary ones are DCMS, where we see the Tourism Minister, Minister of Housing, Treasury, Home Office, because that's Fire, and Department of Trade. There's opportunities there. If we could get the awful package travel regulations removed, every single one of you in this call will be doing more business.
Thanks, Alistair. That was a real good snapshot. I mean, we got 5 minutes left, and there's a lot in this. And I would obviously suggest that anybody in the audience who wants to know more, join up to your associations if they're already joined. But because you actually have so many members right now, you've probably got a little bit of a weather vane of what's actually happening in the UK right now in terms of feedback on bookings. Is it aggressive? Is it soft? I've seen a publication by Sykes who's shown that their numbers, well, the numbers they broadcast are down. I've worked with some managers who've told me that their bookings are way up. So you have a much bigger audience. What are you seeing? Fiona, what's it look like in Scotland?
Right, so obviously different people are going to be wanting to announce different things looking positive or negative. We do a barometer survey twice a year, which gives us a real good sense check on how businesses are performing and confidence is feeling amongst the industry. Last year, it was definitely down at the beginning of the year, picked up in the middle of the year. You've also got to remember that some people do incredibly well consistently, and some people don't do so well. That might be seasonal issues, it might be regional issues, all of those things. So it is up and down. What we are absolutely seeing across the board, not just in our sector, is that domestic tourism has plateaued / gone down. We're seeing a leveling off of general international. The only positive, strong growth is in North America. And the concern is if we have any other kind of international shocks, let's not discuss Trump, what's that going to mean? But Alistair said something very interesting at a summit we spoke at recently, and I think is really worth remembering, is that people are always going to want to come and stay in self-catering and service departments. It is an increasingly growing trend. We are increasingly where people want to stay for independence, for cost effectiveness, all of that stuff. So it's easy to get bogged down in all of this regulatory negativity, but it's also really important to remember the opportunities and the positivities. And as long as we can get through the other side of this mess, this regulatory tsunami, then we'll do very well indeed. So I think my final sort of parting words would be stay strong, stay positive, and keep abreast of what's happening. Join your association.
Follow that. Follow that. I agree with that entirely. It's a message that Fiona and I share. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, particularly for people who are having to navigate out of, say, a furnished holiday let regime, but it's possible to do so if you are really committed to the space. We are going to see some exits from it. A lot of people are trying to exit, but they were not perhaps as committed to the sector. I'm sure there are some people who were. I'm trying to be careful what I say, but you can make a really good return on this in this sector if you get it right. Businesses are going to say it's soft, but there are always some, as Fiona said, who are doing really well, and they've got all their ducks aligned, their pricing, their product, their photography, their marketing. If you get it all aligned, you can still do really, really well.
Richard just disappeared.
So our host left.
I think so.
Jessica, you're in
might need to
charge.
jump in
Jessica,
here. You're in charge. Yeah.
Lovely to see you. You're in charge.
Hello, not a problem. Well, it's perfect timing, really. I just want to say a massive thank you so much to Richard, Fiona, Alistair, your valuable insights, and to everyone just joining today. I think it's really, really clear that the regularity landscape really presents both challenges but also opportunities in our industry. And these discussions just really help navigate them together, really. For anyone here which has any further questions, if you'd like to connect, please feel free to email the marketing team at marketing@staysitu.com. And we really look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So part of the Beyond Booking webinar series, we've got one coming up in February, which is the regulation of short-term lets in Spain and Barcelona. The link is in this chat here, but do not worry, if you click the link, it will definitely be in your diary there. And then for March, we've got the regulation of short-term lets in Holland and Amsterdam. So really exciting stuff. It's all coming soon. So overall, I just want to say thank you again, and we really look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.